and things like that. And so quests solved some of the problems that were inherent in hunting, in that hunting, you didn't have any context for what you were doing. And quests gave you context. So now when you killed those 10 rats, you knew why you were killing those 10 rats, right? To help that guy, help the guy out. And they also were good at leading people around maps. They were good at getting people to spread out in the world. You didn't have as much camp fighting and things like that when you got into quests. But there are a lot of things that quests don't actually do very well, and flaws that they have. And when we were looking at developing Guild Wars 2, this is where we kind of came in. So public content. You've seen a little bit of the rise of public content in games like Tabula Rasa, if anybody played that. So there was a cool base takeover mechanic. If you played Warhammer, you got to see public quests and things like that. However, again, those weren't really things that were the main things you did in the game. Those were like secondary things, and they ended up kind of feeling a little bit like afterthoughts or something like that. And so when we sat down to design Guild Wars 2, we thought, what can we do to really get people to play together? What can we do to really fix some of the problems that were in content? And we actually started, and this is a piece of concept artwork from Guild Wars Utopia, we actually started working on a thing called Guild Wars Utopia. And it was trying to address some of those problems. But the thing that we found while we were developing Guild Wars Utopia was that we weren't able to fully address all of those issues without just dramatically changing Guild Wars 1. And since we had a lot of people who loved Guild Wars 1, we didn't want to just change their game out from under them and bring this entirely new game to them and piss everybody off because we were completely changing their game. And so that was when we made the decision to, hey, well, if we had a completely kind of new start, if we made, Guild Wars 2, this is definitely the direction we'd go in, and we can do these sorts of things. And so with that in mind, we started developing Guild Wars 2. And the very first thing we did was we went to Guild Wars 1 and we implemented events in prototype. We were working on a graphics engine, so we went and we said, well, how do we get started in that? And actually, this character actually has a full, the weapons that they have equipped are actually determining their skills. And there's an event going on. You can see centaurs, or I can't remember there, slay the centaurs attacking Alterbrook Crossing. And some of you guys actually, in looking through the DAT file, found some hints to this stuff, right? that whole thing of like, wow, there's all this text in here of give these swords to this guy and do all that. That was prototype of events that you guys found. So we didn't talk about it too much, but we were like, okay, well they're tricky, so we have to outsmart them. But we still haven't succeeded in that. So here's the Garrison event that many of you have played. This is the prototype of that in Guild Wars 1. That gets us into how events work, which brings us to where we are now. So the number one thing about events is immediacy. Events happen immediately when the player enters the area. So what that means is players don't have to go to a guy and hit accept or opt into it. Now, there's been a little bit of controversy about that because some of you guys have seen, well, you still talk to NPCs. Look, you're talking to one right there. So what this is there's two times when you talk to NPCs to do stuff in the game. The first is when you're continuing your personal story. A lot of times we'll mark an NPC so that people can have an easier time finding them in their personal story, that sort of thing. And the personal story really isn't a quest. For people who have seen it, it's just it's like the story was in a single player RPG. It's just one big long continuous string of things. You never accept anything, you never finish anything. It's just a constant string of events that tells your character's story. The second thing is there are some events that are triggered by players by speaking to NPCs. Now, the event is triggered like that, but once the event is triggered, anyone who participates in it can just walk into the area and play. They don't need to talk to those NPCs. And then the second thing is, We still do allow you to talk to NPCs just in case you want that extra information and all of that, but it's not necessary in any case. Was for it to be the case that there were very specific rewards given away for events. And this is because we didn't want it to be the case that, let's say there's an event that is take over the garrison, and you know, there's one reward for defending the garrison successfully, and there's another reward for an event later that happens off of making the garrison be lost. We didn't want players fighting over whether or not they should let the event fail. We always wanted it to be the case that players are trying to make events succeed. And so, and this is all part of our general philosophy with PvE in Guild Wars 2, is we want players to feel like every other player in the world is their ally. We want them to feel like every other player in the world has the same goals as them and is not a competitor. Every other player is a potential partner. And that was very important for us. So that's also kind of what the event system is about. And so what happens is, often is the case, these karma vendors who have the little karma symbol over their head will pop up, and there's just a huge variety of things that they can do for you. They can sometimes give you really cool items. So if anybody plays the Defend the Garrison event, if you liberate the garrison in kind of out in the persistent world in the human demo, there's a guard who actually has another event where he wants to go to an armory and collect some weapons, and if you manage to do that one, he comes back and he turns into a vendor and sells the items that he just got, you helped him get, and they're really pretty cool items. And so some of you may have seen videos, the Golem battle suits that people were running around in. Those are actually event rewards that people got from a karma merchant. So things like that, just really cool things in the world that you think are rewarding that you can only get by getting karma and by doing events. And a lot of times, the reward merchant will appear as a direct result of what happened in the event. So, for example, that soldier I just talked about is a really good example. He's not there if the centaurs are holding the garrison. So when you liberate the garrison, he then shows up and his event starts, he wants to do his event. And then when the centaurs take the garrison again, if he's there as a merchant, he goes away. And so those are kind of consequences of what happens in the world. And we want all types of different things to happen, different types of rewards. So there's the Shatterer. So basically, in conclusion, we want events to be immediate. You can't have to read a big story about what's going on in order to understand what's going on in an event. You need to be able to kind of see, hey, this is going on, and this is you know, what we need to do in the event. Events need to have consequences, so they need to change the world in some way. Events need to be rewarding for players, so there needs to be a cool, like, hey, we succeeded at this event, what does that buy us? What happens in the world? And, you know, events need to interact with each other and change sometimes, and sometimes, you know, with the Shatterer event, for example, if the cannons get destroyed in that event in the back line, it kicks off a escort event where a repair caravan starts trying to come in and repair the cannons. That's a good example of an event that it's not like it changed directly as a consequence from the event finishing, but it changed based on something that happened during the event. So, so we can do that sort of stuff too. Okay, so that's kind of a basic overview of events. Does anybody have any real quick questions about what an event is? Does everybody think they have a pretty decent understanding about what an event is? Okay. Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is there any, do the events eventually reset? In other words, think about the water hole and the harpies, and clear the water hole and the harpies move out, and the others are able to get back in. Is there any point where the harpies come back in and say?
Yeah, so there is. So so this has been one point of confusion. That's a good question. So let me clear this up. This has been one point of confusion I think that we've seen from some people. Events are not permanent. They don't have permanent consequences on the world. By that I mean, if a town or village gets destroyed, if harpies get driven out, it's not that they're there forever. However, events have persistent effect on the world. What I mean by that is, whatever event effect completing or not completing an event has in the world, it's persistent in that it stays that way until something else comes along and makes it so that it doesn't. So in that particular case, what will happen is, harpies in the area will eventually start coming back in gradually, and if enough of them eventually take over that area, then the harpies will again establish their nests in that area and that sort of thing. In the case of towns and things like that getting taken over, the town gets overrun. It's overrun until someone comes along and does something about it. And so that's what we mean when we say they're persistent. It just wouldn't have been practical for us to do permanent things. Now, we have said that there are permanent consequences in the world, and when we say that, what we mean is your personal story. So that's when there are permanent consequences in the world. So, for example, during your story, if you decide to let another character live or die, that character is going to live or die, and that's going to be undoable. And that's an example of a permanent consequence. And that stuff happens in your personal story. So a good way to think of it, personal story equals sort of permanent consequences, persistent world equals persistent consequences. Hopefully that clears that up. Okay, cool. Anybody have anything else? Okay.